Well, it's a pleasure to welcome you here this morning, and just so you to know, there's a whole fireplace crowd again back here. Hello, folks. Why don't you give yourselves a little hand? We have the truly devoted, led by George up front here, and then we got the hallway crowd. So I hope you get to meet each other at some time this morning. And we'll try to make sure that happens. We have a great day planned. Chuck has been marching us through the Gospel of Matthew as he's been teaching to us. And I've been sticking with the Old Testament lessons of the patriarchs. I got fascinated by them. I've never talked about them. And it's an amazing story. If you'll recall, 2 weeks ago, we left Jacob, the last and the greatest of the patriarchs, Jacob, the plotter, the planner, the deceiver, the grasper, the betrayer. We left him as he was returning to Beersheba with his wives and his family and his children and his flocks and his herd and all of his possessions, because he was on a journey to go back and reconcile his relationship with his brother Esau and his father Isaac, because he had stolen the blessing. And so he's on his way home. And if you'll recall, that night before he got there, God met him and wrestled with him to the very core of his being, of who he really was. And God touched the socket of his hip so that for the rest of his life, Jacob would walk with a limp, so that he would know that he was no longer the grasper, but that he was his. He was God's. And so now we find the story picks up that Jacob has 12 sons. The 11th son, the firstborn of the woman that he really loved, who was Rachel, was a son by the name of Joseph. There's more written about Joseph than any other person in the whole Bible except for Jesus. He's a central figure in all that's going to take place. And if you'll recall, when he was 17 years old, his brothers got angry at him, and they were bitter, and they were jealous, and they sold him into slavery to Egypt. When he arrived in Egypt, he arrived around the year 1700 BC. The great pyramid of Giza was already 1,000 years old. It was the 12th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom, the golden age of reunification. It was the height of the Egyptian empire. He spent the next 13 years in Egypt in prison. In prison. Then, through a miraculous series of events, at the age of 30, he was appointed the prime minister of all Egypt. And then, one day in his courtroom, unexpectedly, 10 men show up from a distant land. There's a great famine in the world. And these 10 men have journeyed a long distance from the land of Canaan to come to Egypt to beg for food to take back to Beersheba. He knows who they are. Last time he saw them, he was 22 years old, and they had left him for dead. Unexpectedly, when he saw his brothers, he began a calculated plan for a redemptive purpose. I love this about the Bible, the richness and the depth. He wants to bring his brothers to an awareness of the wrong that they have done. And he wants to bring them to an awareness of the grace and the truth and the sovereignty of God. So he doesn't immediately reveal himself. He speaks through an interpreter. He gives them food, but he keeps one of the brothers, Simeon, as collateral and sends them back to tell their father that they have this food. And to tell their father that when they need to return again for more food and to resupply, that they need to bring Benjamin with them, the youngest brother, the other son of Rachel. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. We're still talking about Jacob. Hope you're bearing with me on this history lesson here, the backstory. Hope you're keeping track of this. When they report these events to their father Jacob back in Beersheba, in his old age, with his limp, he expresses profound grief. In fact, the passage in the scripture writes it this way. He says, in his old age, which should be the ripe age, he says, everything is against me. I am no more. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now Benjamin will be no more. I am undone. I'm undone. He asks what I call the Jacob question. Have you ever asked this question? Why is life so difficult? Why is it so hard? Why is this nightmare, this relational nightmare, which is what we're talking about today, relationships, why is this relational nightmare happening to me? Why all of this harm and this hurt and this pain and this brokenness and this dysfunctionality in these relationships? Why does this wound go so deep? Why doesn't God care more? Why doesn't he pay attention? Why isn't he in control? The Jacob question, what do I do when life makes no relational sense whatsoever? When I find myself in an impossible place with no way out? Broken relationships, estrangement, and betrayal. Jacob feels like his life is unraveling. It's falling apart in his limp. I remember, I have a great-grandmother. I have a grandmother. I don't have her any longer. She's wherever she is. I'm not quite sure where she is. Because I would like to say to you, I had a grandmother of English royalty or something like that, but my grandmother was Polish. And when she would speak to her friends, she spoke in Polish. I had no idea half the time what she was trying to tell me. She was a tough woman. But she would come and stay at our house for 2 weeks every summer, and she'd set up a card table with chairs around it because she loved puzzles. And she would get a big box of a puzzle, a great big puzzle, and she would open that puzzle up and she would dump it on the table and she would say, now put that together before dinner. And then she'd go into the kitchen about 2 o'clock in the afternoon and she'd get, I don't even know what it was, a highball, and she would drink one of those every afternoon. That was my Polish grandmother. Fix that puzzle and get me my highball. And I would say, well, Grandma, can I see the cover of the box so that I can see what it looks like? And she would say, absolutely not. And I would say, you want me to put this whole puzzle and all these pieces back together again without knowing what it's supposed